So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for our webinar programme. So today, we're delighted to welcome independent financial advisor Victor Sachs of VS Associates. Victor began his career at the HSBC Bank as a financial planning manager, working initially with personal customers. He then moved to the commercial team, where his clients were business owners of all sizes, helping them to fulfill both their personal and business financial objectives. In 2011, after 17 years at the bank, he started his own business, and he now offers highly qualified professional and holistic services to all of his clients. Victor's going to be talking to us about some key areas of financial planning relevant to micro business owners. He'll provide a brief overview of the pension landscape in the UK, retirement planning, state pensions, workplace pensions, and employer responsibilities. And he'll also discuss investments such as ISAs and national savings. He'll then open it up to the floor for discussion. So if you have a burning question for Victor, please type it in the chat box as we go through, or turn on your webcam at the end and raise your hand if you'd like to speak to him directly. Before we begin, here are some more events we've got planned for you over the coming weeks. Don't forget that we are able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events, and just contact Lucy if you'd like to know anything more about that. So now I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Victor.
Good morning, all. Hope everyone is good. Hope everyone is well. So I'm going to start. We'll look at I guess we'll look at the state pension. Many people poo-poo it, but we'll have a look, and we'll have a look at its underlying value if we were to go and purchase an investment that produces £10,000 a year. How much would we have need to have saved in order to do that? We'll talk pensions general, and then we'll look at, as an employer, anybody who employs anyone, what does workplace pension mean? And at the same point, we will look at what responsibility now lies with the employer, and has done since workplace pensions have come into our arena probably over the last 10, 11 years. And we can go all the way back to stakeholder pensions, which first cropped up in 2001. So let's start with a state pension. And I guess I may, and also can we please bear in mind, I am UK registered. I only really know about UK based pension schemes. I have awareness of what goes on around the rest of the world, but not something that I would want to talk about in an open forum, as each individual situation is different. I'll be looking to give you some generic information today. I can't comment on personal requests such as, should I retire now? Should I wait 2 years? Should I take this? Should I top up? I really can't answer that on this forum. I need to know a lot more information about the individual before I'm willing to give financial advice. So state pension at the moment stands at just over £10,000 a year for those who are going to be eligible based on 20 years of full payment in, and have reached the state retirement age, which will slowly move out to 70. But at the moment, the vast majority of us, it'll be anywhere between 66 and 68 over the next sort of 20 years. Beyond that, it will push out, and it will ultimately reach 70. So £10,000 a year is where we stand. Let's talk about the state pension very briefly. It is a benefit. There is no right for anybody to have it. If it were a right, then those that we know who have passed away before state retirement age would have received a significant amount of money from the money that they have saved or put aside for the state pension. That isn't the case. Unfortunately, if you pass away before you get there, you don't get anything at all. But if we are able to make it and we do receive that £10,000 a year, we'd probably need circa 220 to 240,000 pounds saved in order to generate that sort of income. We also must understand that we have a triple lock currently, which protects that pension in terms of interest rate rises and inflation, consumer prices index. And we have seen significant rises in state pension payments over the last 12 months, as we've seen interest rates rocketed. A normal bog standard personal pension plan, or dare we say annuity, which is the vehicle that drives out that income on a fixed basis, you would need even higher amounts than £220,000 to start looking at an income of £10,000 that rises in line with inflation. How do we fund our state pension? It comes from our national insurance contributions, and it's approximately 2 to 4% of that national insurance contribution that is deducted and has been deducted on a monthly basis that will be put to one side and start building up our value. So if we can pause, reflect, take a moment and work out perhaps how much NI on an average salary in the UK is around £30,000. And if we reckon at about £3,000 a year, roughly, is being deducted in NI, we then can have an idea that maybe £500 a month, maybe a couple of £100 a month is being moved. So maybe £2,000 a year. We're going to have to go some to build up a pot that's worth £220,000 to £230,000. So state pension is a good bastion, a good building block, but we've also got to acknowledge that £10,000 for the vast majority of people will not cover the outgoings when we get to our retirement age and when we look at the rising costs of gas and electric, council tax and everything else that will obviously go up in value. So how do we help fund? How do we help bridge? Well, I guess if we can sit there and kind of go, when we move to retirement, what is there? What else is there? For those of us who have been employed, maybe there is a company pension scheme. For those of us who have worked all our lives for ourselves, well, yes, there is saving into a pension. There is also your own home. If we're able to detach head from heart, and if for those of us who have been fortunate enough to be able to get a bigger house to accommodate the family that for those who have, and suddenly we stare at a 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom house where only 1 or 2 are being used, it's a big call. But to downsize out and to have an accommodation that now meets the required needs potentially would generate a surplus amount of capital, which even if we put in today's banks and building societies at 4 and 5% interest rates, would offer potentially a generous amount of income alongside that the state pension. But do we want to wait until we're 65 or 66 or 67 or 68 or 70 until we actually retire? So more and more importantly, now comes the focus of actually trying to save outside of state pension and outside of downsize. Who knows? I mean, at 59 years of age, I have a 12-year-old son. So my downsizing is not going to happen anytime soon. And the idea of blended families and second families and third families is more and more commonplace. So downsizing isn't an easy thing to do, but it's one of the options. The other option, yeah, dare I say it, saving via a pension plan. I have lots of clients who come to see me and are willing and happy to tell me that their pension plan is absolute rubbish. And I often struggle, I can't lie, with that. Because if we look at a UK-based personal pension plan, we will see that from the outset, anyone who puts money into it currently as an individual will receive an uplift on that contribution at the highest marginal rate of tax that that individual pays personally. So what do we mean by that? So a basic rate taxpayer, so those whose earnings are roughly under £50,000 a year, if you put in £80 to your pension plan, overnight that will be uplifted to 100. If you are in the main a 40% taxpayer, roughly for every £60 you put in, it will be uplifted to 100. And if you're in the realms of earning more than £121,000 a year and an additional rate taxpayer, you put in 55, 60, but £55, you will then be uplifted to 100. If you are a business owner who's making the profits within the business and paying corporation tax on your profits, if those profits are healthy enough and there is actually a surplus, then a limited company can make a contribution to a director's pension. So I run my own business as a limited company, and I can divert my profits to a pension. So for example, if my taxable profit was £50,000 and I paid corporation tax of 20% on £50,000, and we know I'm going to pay £10,000. But if I took off that 50,000, if I put £10,000 into a pension, my taxable profit is now 40. And I now pay £8,000 corporation tax. I've saved £2,000. And that money has now gone into a pension plan. So there's no further relief that's available because the contribution is made by a company. But I get to invest in a number of different asset classes. There's around 4,500 investment funds that become available to me, from the very low risks to the very high. And whatever growth I enjoy on that money is free of any taxation whatsoever. And even when I get to that age, even when I achieve the age of 55 currently, and that 55 will be prevalent all the way through until the 6th of April 2028, when the access age of a personal pension will rise to 57. But if you are 55 before 6th of April 2028, that £10,000 that I got into my company without paying any tax, say it grows to £20,000, I'm not paying tax on that either. And then if I want to, I can take a quarter of that as tax-free cash. The £15,000 can remain in that pension pot for as long as I want it to. And it's only when I start drawing on that element will I pay tax at the basic, high, or additional rate, dependent upon what other income I earn. So let's go back and kick off the bullet points that what we've just discovered is that we have a pension framework which will give corporation tax relief on contributions coming through from your company. Will give personal tax relief at the highest marginal rate of tax you pay on your own personal post-tax money. So where you draw a salary from your limited company, you can also make a personal contribution into your pension scheme. Once the monies are in that pension scheme, it grows completely free of tax. And at the point of retirement, which can be as early as 55, you can take a quarter of what you've built up as tax-free cash. And you then decide when you pay tax on the rest of those funds. Now, if we go morbid for a minute, if you die before reaching retirement age, or the age in which you want to access, then whatever capital is in your pension can be left to your nearest and dearest or your children. And the same can be said, or all of them, It depends. Everyone's got whatever, and can be changed. If divorce happens or you have an argument, you want to change your beneficiary, you change your beneficiary. If you're now in receipt of income, you now have the option to say, okay, if I died and I'm now drawing that pension, the remaining pot of money can now pass to my spouse. If your spouse is predeceased, that remaining pot can go to your children. So gone are the days where on a personal pension plan, where you die, it dies. Gone are the days of high costs and high charges associated with pension plans. Today's modern day pension plan can have an annual management charge of somewhere in the region of 0.3%. And you can manage that yourself through one of the many apps that are available and many online services. Or you can have someone to shoot and bring on a financial advisor, and you'll get all of that for under 1%. So I do find it difficult when someone tells me that personal pension is rubbish. What's gone on is possibly the investments that were set when the plan was created has fallen by the wayside and gone out of kilter. The individuals who have the paperwork stacked at the back of the wardrobe or in a drawer somewhere aren't reviewing it and aren't looking at it. And our attitudes to investments can change. We can either become very cautious or very adventurous and back again over our lifetime. And if that investment within the pension hasn't been reviewed regularly and fallen into kilter with how we are feeling, then that's when you get a result that isn't in line with your current thought process. And suddenly we can have what could be considered a bad pension. We just don't have an investment that aligns to how we feel about investments at that time. As we start to see capital gains tax allowances being reduced, as we're possibly seeing anything beyond a house of a certain value being classed as too much, or having people who have done very, very well having big pension pots being attacked from a taxation perspective. One of the last areas we can enjoy some really good tax relief and tax incentives right now is through a personal pension plan. Is there a downside to it? Yeah, you've got to wait until you're 55 before you get your hands on it. So if people on this webinar are in their 20s and 30s, and they've got to go through life stages of bigger house, having children, maybe looking at private education, maybe looking at university fees for children, then the idea of throwing every spare bit of capital into a pension may not be the smart one. Equally, if you have children or grandchildren, they can have a personal pension plan. The youngest person who can have a personal pension plan is the baby that's born today. And you can maybe recycle child benefit if you're in receipt of that, or your children are in receipt because the grandchild's just been born. But the downside is that grandchild's got to wait until maybe they're 70 before they're going to get their hands on it, or 60. So lumping everything forward into personal pensions, may not be the greatest idea. Only your own personal finances will be able to turn around and say whether that's a viable option. But a pension plan, whether you are 40, 50, or 60, is a worthwhile investment strategy, not only for the corporation tax saving, personal tax relief, but the tax-free growth that is also available. And let's also look at one other morbid thing. If, God forbid, death occurs and you are the second person, that last person to die, when inheritance tax is liable, any monies in a pension plan that hasn't been touched, so where the tax-free cash is untouched and where income is untouched, and passed to beneficiaries free of inheritance tax because of the master trust, and master trust that is governed by a financial conduct authority, our financial governing body, means that they will be exempt from inheritance tax. So there are lots of really good reasons to consider, and especially the broadness and depthness of pensions. So yeah, I'm a big fan of personal pensions. I'm also a big fan of looking at a client from a holistic perspective when we talk about retirement. So properties do come into play. They are an asset class. And there's no reasons why downsizing can't be spoke about. Whether a client wants to do it or not, that is up to them. But given potentially the higher bills that we're going to be facing, it may become tough to heat the 4 or 5 bedroom house if there isn't a strong enough income coming through to support it. Or worse still, we may see clients, and I see them quite regularly, where they live downstairs and they don't do upstairs, but the emotional pull on selling the house is such that they won't allow themselves to downsize. Pensions have changed since the 60s and 70s. And some of us may be sitting on some pensions that were set up in the 70s, 80s and 90s. They were more expensive. They also had some guarantees on it. So before anyone runs out and ditches the past to go for a brand new one, the idea of what does a financial advisor do, or how can they help, is to just make sure that you're not losing any guarantees, guaranteed growth rates, guaranteed annuity rates, or any other guarantees that were given in the 70s, 80s and 90s pensions that have become far too expensive to honour now and are therefore not available in newer plans. So, as I say, before rushing out, buying another pension that goes on top of any old one, either one, talk to the existing plan provider and check if there are any guarantees, or enlist the help of your local financial advisor, who will be responsible ultimately for the advice that they give, but they will give the advice based on the information that they can find and make the necessary recommendations going forward. Whilst we're looking at taxation, capital gains tax, and that erosion that we are going to be seeing, bearing in mind, it's only a couple of years ago, we had a £12,500 capital gains tax allowance. This year, we saw that go to 6. Next year, we see that go to 3. Come November, is it possible we're going to have a change of government? I will let you decide. But does a change of government mean that, well, the capital gains tax allowance is only 3? Do we then move to 0? So is it even more important to consider investment strategies and places where we can place our money where it's free of tax? One of those areas that come to mind is the individual savings account. Now we can toggle between, and we're outside of pensions now. So, and the big question that I often get was, should I have a pension? Should I have an ISA? My answer is obviously both. They do 2 different things, and they're designed to do 2 different things. One is designed to try and provide you with an income for life. And the other one is to either offer you the opportunity to save and to pull out that lump sum at some point in the future. That's not saying that's what you have to do with it. But the idea of an ISA is putting in money and pulling it out in years down the line and go and spend and buy something, or do something else, maybe buy an income, maybe give it as a gift, or maybe go on a Cunard and buy yourself a world cruise. Either way, that's your choice and your options to do it. ISAs, as we know, come in 2 forms. We have a cash ISA, which for years was not doing much, but due to whatever went on and whatever we can go on about what's gone on in the past, high levels of inflation, Ukraine war, Middle Eastern conflict, inflation prices, quasi-quartering Liz Truss at the beginning of the year, we are in a higher level of interest rates than we've known for 20 years. And those 20 years will be looked upon as the anomaly rather than the norm. As a 60-year-old man, nearly 60, interest rates of 18% when I first came into the housing market was not uncommon. Suddenly, due to the financial crisis that we saw in 2001, we start to see, 2007, 2008, we start to see these lower interest rates. And they've been around, and there's a whole generation that hasn't known anything more than just over 1% interest rates. So now we find ourselves maybe staring down the barrel of 3 or 4% as an interest rate going forward. Suddenly cash can start to see a return of 4 and 5%. And if we end up with inflation at 2 or 3%, cash can offer us a real buffer against inflation. So a cash ISA, which for many years has not offered anything at all, can now offer us something. Equally, there's the investment of stock and share ISA. Our stock and share investment performances will range incredibly from 2 or 3%, minus 2 or 3%, or plus 12, plus 13%. And it really does depend on a client's investment attitude as to where they go. If a client is expecting the ride of a Rolls Royce, I'm not going to suddenly sit here and recommend that they get into a Ferrari. And vice versa, if a client wants the ride of a Ferrari, they're not going to go and sit in a Rolls Royce. So part of the work that the advisor does is work out, well, what works for that particular client. But the one thing that we know about an ISA, whilst we don't get tax relief as we do on pensions, is we do get tax-free growth. Now, again, that is all subject to change as governments change. We've had governments who don't like the names. They don't like TESA, for example, for those of us old enough to remember the tax-exempt special savings account or personal equity plan, PEP, they then get changed, a different name. We're going to go for individual savings accounts, even though ostensibly it was the same thing. But governments have the right to change. Currently, we sit in a regime that says £20,000 into an ISA can be split between a cash and stock and share ISA, can be withdrawn and put back in and not lose its status, but can be aligned to any investment. Now, we may see in the budget maybe a further allowance where monies are invested in UK companies, maybe in UK smaller companies. This is all subject to discussion. This is all subject to sound bites, and we won't know whether there are any changes until the 6th of March, when the Chancellor will stand up and give his budget speech. But we know that £20,000 can go into an ISA. It can't be funded by a company. It has to be funded by an individual. And for that reason, on the application form, the national insurance number is given, and there are checks done randomly to ensure no one is overfunding. But every adult in your house over the age of 18 can have a stock and share ISA or an ISA at the full rate. So if you trust your kids and they're still living with you, and there's 2 adults in that house, depending on how many adults you are in that house, determines how much per annum can be put aside tax-free. You also have national savings, premium bonds. These areas, national savings will give us an option. There will be fixed, there will be interest rates available. You have national savings certificates, national savings bonds, £40,000 per adult. Doesn't give an interest rate as such. So I'm talking premium bonds, forgive me. The premium bonds will allow monies to go in. They don't give an interest rate as such, but the prize pot is estimated to be worth around 3 or 4%. So you are under attack from inflation. £100,000 put in a premium bond today, in 10 years' time, will still have a value of 100,000. So you are under attack from inflation, but you have the opportunity to share in the prize pot and be in the draw for the £1 million. So as we find ourselves coming under attack, inverted commas, from capital gains tax reductions, and we're starting to want to maybe find somewhere where can we put our money that's not going to be subject to tax, not only ongoing, but also at the end, when we've decided, okay, enough's enough, we want to take our money out. I guess the plus point is there are places. It doesn't all have to be given away, and it doesn't all have to be spent. But equally, I guess one of the biggest things that is still out there, this one of the biggest sleeping taxes out there, and it wasn't going to be part of the remit, but why not? We've got time, is inheritance tax. When you think inheritance tax allowance has been with us, I think the same allowance has probably been around almost 20 years. House prices have rocketed, but still we have a £325,000 allowance for inheritance tax. If you're married, obviously that's doubled. And even if you're married and you have, your partner's predeceased, that allowance carries on. But if you're divorced, it's deemed that that partner has died and that you were never married, so you have a personal allowance. To put that into sharp context, I saw a couple not so long ago that lived together for 35 years, were never married, and the wife unexpectedly died. Her inheritance tax bill was £650,000, and yet had they spent £50 and got married, there would have been half, if not less than half, that to be paid. So if anyone out there is living with someone and has done for many, many years, I know it's a tough pill to swallow, but seriously, or if you know friends, family, colleagues, it doesn't have to be an excuse for a big party. It can be a very quiet ceremony somewhere, but it could be worth a huge amount of money, especially if there is a home involved where what's called a residential nil rate band, where the house is worth less than £2 million, means that there's an additional £175,000 to be added onto the 325. That means a husband and wife, or a husband and husband, or a wife and wife, with £1 million made up of house and cash and contents and everything else, would be exempt from inheritance tax. Whereas a cohabiting couple, on first death, the first 325 is exempt, but the rest of that person's estate is assessed for inheritance tax. So it can create huge saving. And something to consider if we're looking at inheritance tax, ultimately, what do we do with our money? We either give it away via a trust or we spend it. There are no real clever get outs. And the UK has a taxation situation that even if you decide now to go and live in a different country, that unless you have given up burial rights in this country, you're still going to be classed as a UK resident. And therefore, the tax on worldwide assets falls to the UK, even if you've been in Spain for 10 or 15 years and then you pass. The UK will hold the right. So there's a lot of clients I know that I'm speaking to that are going over, and it's a bit of a harsh talk to them about where the UK gives up its right on global assets and what hoops someone needs to go through in order to be classed no longer as a UK resident for tax purposes. But perhaps that's beyond the scope of this particular webinar. So the last point we'll come to, and we'll come back to pensions, is we'll look at the employer responsibility. And one of the things that workplace pensions brought into sharp focus was anybody who employs anybody on a contract. And that came down to nannies and gardeners, where there is a contract and where they are employed solely for you. That doesn't happen so much now, but if we look at a self-employed individual who employs someone, then there is a requirement to have a workplace pension. Where I have my wife as part of my business, my wife owns 30% of the business. There is no employee-employer relationship where you have with regards to workplace pensions. And that's the defining moment. So if spouse employs husband or husband employs spouse, the shares remain 100% in one person's name, then there is an employee-employer relationship. And where that occurs, you have to have a workplace pension. And the rules is that person is automatically in, and the individual has to opt themselves out. The anniversary comes round and the individual is opted back in automatically. They then have to opt themselves out. The third year, the individual is automatically put in. And at that point, it is hoped that the person who was resisting gives up and stays in. If, however, at that point after the third year they opt out, then they are out. The responsibility of a workplace pension and who to use is the employer's. So if it's higher charging, underperforming, the responsibility is on you. That's a tough one, especially if you've got one person and one other person there. But ultimately, that responsibility for who to use, where to invest, is the individual's responsibility. The range of funds that will be within that workplace pension, how big, how small, that becomes on you, because you're setting up. Although your accountant may facilitate through your payroll, the responsibility of who to use is on the employer. So that's your responsibility if you're the employer. As the employee, you'll be able to look at what scheme you've been enrolled into, and you'll be able to look at the individual funds that are available. And you can move your money from whatever the default investment fund is, and you can use it to one of your choice. You can make that decision. But the actual scheme that you're in has been dictated to and decided by the employer. So, and then as I say, where you have joint ownership of a business, there is no employee-employer relationship. So you don't have to have a workplace pension, and you are free to have whatever pension scheme you want that you can both choose, both decide, or, and invest wherever each of you want to invest. But where you have a scenario where you have an employee that has no shares and is just working for you, depending upon the hours that person works for you, then there will be a responsibility on you to set up a workplace pension, and it will be up to that individual to opt themselves out. It's not up to the employer to opt them out. There are rules which are on .gov.uk website that will help you understand your responsibilities. You don't have to get involved with a financial advisor if you don't want to. There is plenty of information out, and I would suggest go .gov.uk, because if you Google that kind of area, you will be faced with a load of sponsored ads, and you'll end up with providers that may or may not provide you with the right solution. So the best thing is to hit workplace pensions, auto-enrollment, .gov.uk, and within those government website, within those government pages, will show you what the employer's responsibility is. So hopefully we've given you a background on state pension, how valuable it is a benefit, and how much money you would have needed to have saved to replicate what the state pension offers. We've spoken about personal pension plans and the brilliant tax reliefs that are available for an individual paying in personally, and for someone who runs their own limited company. We've also spoken about the growth, the tax advantages there. We've spoken about the inheritance tax benefits of a pension. We've spoken about what happens on death. How does tax become payable on a pension scheme? We've ventured into ISAs. We've also looked at capital gains tax. We've had a look at national savings and how they can help. And we've also finally just had a look at employer responsibilities with regards to workplace pensions. I've been chatting now for 40 minutes. I've got half a cup of coffee that's going slightly cold, but I'm going to take a drink from. I'm now going to throw it open. If there have been any questions or are any questions, I'll do my best to help. I cannot give advice. If someone's going to ask me, should I retire now or tomorrow? Should I take benefits today or tomorrow? Should I fund this or should I fund that? I really can't give that information without knowing more, as that is advice rather than guidance. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much indeed, Victor. That was really interesting. And yeah, I think we got a lot of value out of that. Any questions coming out? So Nick's just put in a question. I don't know if you want to put your microphone on, Nick, and ask it yourself.
Oh, that's probably easier. It was quite a long one. So, Victor, thank you for that. It was very useful. Two questions, actually. So it might have just been a turn of phrase, but you were talking about drawing lump sum from pension. And you said when you retire, and that can be from 55. So I suppose the first question is, can you take lump sum while still working? Hopefully that's an easy one. And the second one is, you didn't cover lifetime allowance when we were talking about pensions. And I know that's something that obviously keeps changing at the minute. So I'd be interested in your latest view on that.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm living proof. I drew my HSBC pension because I don't want to pay life poker with God. I took tax-free cash and income last year. I work and I pay into a personal pension. There are anomalies with final salary pension schemes, or defined benefit schemes and personal pension schemes, things called money purchase annual allowance. And the money purchase annual allowance comes into play where someone is drawing income from their personal pension. They can take tax-free cash from a personal pension, and so long as they don't draw taxable income, they will not be subject to a reduced amount of money that they can pay into a pension. If they're drawing income and cash from a final salary pension scheme, they are not subject to money purchase annual allowance. But if you've got a Scottish Widows, Aviva, Standard Life type personal pension plan, you took tax-free cash and are drawing income, whereas currently you can pay 100% of salary or £60,000 into a pension in any year, you will be subject to a restriction of £3,600. Okay, so you can take benefit from a pension at 55, providing you are obviously at 55, and continue working and continue paying into a pension. You mentioned a lifetime allowance, which stands at $1,086,000, with zero tax payable on any amount accrued beyond that level. The interesting thing to note on that is it's been turned to 0% rather than completely removed from statute law. This means that any subsequent government could turn that back on. So any client I'm seeing now where their lifetime allowance is circa $1 million, maybe it's because I'm old and jaundiced. I am kind of sitting there going, let's wait. We've got an election coming up this year. Let's see what happens and who gets in, because it may not come back, but it might do. And I don't want a client caught in between where they're funding that pension, they've taken it to $1.5 million, and now suddenly there's a 20, 30, 40 or 50% tax on anything that's held, that anything above $1,086,000. So go forward with caution. If we've got an individual that's at annual allowance, and accept and acknowledge that there may be a return to that tax charge. That's what I would say. That's what I'm advising my clients. Ultimately, if they want to go, my documentation and paperwork will say, we have discussed, we realise, the client understands, but this is the way they want to go.
Great, thank you.
Nanda,
That's
I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question yourself?
Hi there, thank you. That was useful. Yes, I thought it might
Thanks.
be easier than trying to put a great long message. It's to do with crystallising or part crystallising your pension or wanting to take a wedge out. So say you think, well, you know, I could do with a new car or a big fat cruise or something, and I need 30 grand, but I haven't really got the funds without perhaps dipping into my pension. I don't quite know how it works out then into so you're not taking the full 25% if you've got a lot more than that. But how do they then calculate the rest that you do? Do they kind of have a value at a certain point and say, well, 25% of that is 100 grand or something, and at any time you can start to draw the rest? Or do they keep reevaluating it at the point at which you take more out?
Okay, so let's make it easy maths. Let's say you want 25k out. Yeah. So they will crystallize £100,000. And that means you're now going to take 25,000 out. But let's say your pot is 500,000. Yeah, or let's say, in fact, let's make it easier. Let's say the pot is 400,000. Yeah. You want 25k out. They're going to move, they're going to crystallize 100. You're going to take 25% of that. Yeah, and go buy a car. So the 100,000 is now into what's called, say, a flexible drawdown. It's ready for you to draw off income, and you will pay tax on that part, but only when you draw it off. Yeah, it will sit there. It will be invested in the same investments that it's in at the moment. It's just, it will be flagged slightly different. It will probably be other brackets post-retirement. But your 300,000 remains uncrystallized. And if that 300 then grows to 350 or grows back to 400, then you have the tax relief remaining on that element.
Okay, cool.
So actually done the way you've described, and providing your pot escalates year on year, you could end up with more than 25% of the original fund when you first started. Yeah. So you could take 400,000, take a quarter of 100, right? Fine. Leave the 3. That 3 could go back to 4. And then you could take another element off of that, and then you can keep going. So actually you could do that over 5 or 6 years. You'll probably end up with maybe, I don't know, 40 or 50%.
Yeah, I've got you. So
because of the way it would accumulate up.
If you don't need it all, it might be best to leave it where it is.
Correct. Or you draw off each month. You could draw off 25% tax-free, 75% taxable. So rather than taking the tax-free cash as a lump sum, you could take it as income.
I got you.
So you might take 25k for the first 5 years on your metaphoric pot, and that's all free of tax because you are taking the tax-free cash element of your pension. Yeah. And it's only when you've exhausted that, then it becomes payable. Or you take £10,000 out for the rest of your life, and you're only going to be paying tax on £7,500 because 2.5 is deemed your 25% tax-free.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
No worries.
Any more questions from those of you who are on here at the moment? Peter, we did have a quick discussion about your question. I don't know if you want to put your microphone on and ask Victor directly, but I know he's not able to give a lot of information or a lot of feedback to your question because he doesn't have sufficient information. So, Peter, do you want to switch on?
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, and I appreciate it's on the border of personal advice or not. It's the bridging the gap between now and a 15-month gap between now and being able to draw state pension. It's for my wife, who has a reasonable pension pot and no other significant income. The question was, it's going through our minds, whether to draw down, start drawing possibly an annuity, or and this is for the next 15 months to bridge until state pension is available. Given that state pension is about the same currently as your personal tax allowance, so I'm just balancing those two. So it's a matter of bridging that gap, whether to draw down all of the tax-free allowance from the pension pot, or only draw down a part? And the answer to the previous question sort of implied that only draw down what you need at the moment.
So if I was, so obviously I can't give specific advice. There's, you know, it's very difficult in that context, the questions of why, what's going on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately advice creates my responsibility. And without full facts, I'm not allowed to do that. So yeah, if I was I would be sitting there talking to someone kind of going, look, what is it? Is it right and proper? By pulling off income earlier than perhaps you first thought, does that cause detriment? Will that cause detriment to you later on in life if markets were to drop down? In terms of purchasing an annuity, consider all options. The traditional annuity, once you've gone into it, you can't get out of it. So if you were to annuitize £100,000 of your pension pot to produce, I don't know, £5,000–6,000 a year, if it's the wrong annuity that's been purchased, you will not be able to get that £100,000 back out. And that will die, or that will cut in half when your wife dies, and then that will die when you die. So any plans you may have had of creating or leaving some kind of legacy for children or nieces, nephews, or, you know, whatever, or charity, would go out the window. So make sure if you're going to go down the annuity route, you make sure you get one that's temporary, and what costs are involved in doing that. Or if you are looking to draw off your income, then make sure your current pension scheme is geared for flexible access or income drawdown. Depending on how old the pension scheme is, it may or may not be available to you in its current format, and there may be changes that are needed to that scheme in order to be able to accommodate that request.
Thank you. Yeah. What do you have an opinion on the current annuity rates in the current market?
Annuity rates will be pretty much on a standard basis, will be pretty much in line at the higher end of interest rates. So I would expect to see somewhere between 4 and 5%. If someone did, the other option is to look at a medically underwritten annuity. If we're taking a statin, if we're taking any high blood pressure pills, or if we're on any medication, depending upon what the person in the dark room, otherwise known as the actuary, views the medication and views the ailments as to whether they are life restricting, you could see annuity rates hit double digits. I have a client of mine at the moment who's enjoying 11.1% return on his annuity. He is single, he has no dependents, he wants a good life, and he doesn't want to be subject to market volatility. He also has an ailment list that goes on for 7 pages because I had to write up the report through to the medical annuity provider for them to assess. And as far as they're concerned, he's not going to make old bones, and therefore they were quite happy to give a very generous sized annuity. So annuities come in various forms, and it isn't just a one size fits all.
Well, thanks again.
Any more questions while we've got Victor for a few more minutes? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Victor. That's been really interesting. I know it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but
I've got one for Simone. Simona just put one on.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. Yes, okay. When it comes to workplace pensions as a basic taxpayer, to me, it's the same thing. If I pay my pension via my limited company, it will be tax deducted, or if I pay myself and get tax relief.
So yeah, hi. I just
Hi.
wanted to make sure that my understanding is correct from kind of a cost-effective perspective, because if it's via my company and I am the owner and director of my own company, then I get tax, then it's profits and I get
Oh, you're frozen on us, Simona. You will get for if we need to come back to this. So yeah, as a one-person limited company owner, much like myself, any monies that you pay into a pension from your company will be classed as a business deductible expense, and therefore you will get corporation tax relief. Any monies that if you're then drawing that profit out, now it depends whether you're drawing it out as salary and dividend, bearing in mind again restrictions on dividend allowance and the taxation that generates, or whether you're pulling it out as salary and that salary generates national insurance. It may be, without knowing the full facts of your business and without knowing the full facts of your earnings, it may be more tax efficient for your limited company to pay your pension contributions than drawing out as income once you take into consideration salary and therefore income tax, dividend tax, and if you're paying it and your national insurance contributions, should your salary be significant enough that you are paying NI, it may be slightly more tax advantageous to pay those pension contributions via your limited company rather than personally. It may not, and it could be worthwhile a chat with your accountant.
Have you frozen again, Simona? Oh dear, I hope you managed to hear it. Maybe listen back to the recording if you haven't been able to get what Victor said. Right, we've got a couple more minutes. If anybody has another question they'd like to ask.
Sally, feel free to share my email address, victor@vsassociates.co.uk in the chat box. I'll answer any questions as best I can, being generic as I can't give specific advice, but I'll take it as close to the edge as I can. Okay, that's great. All right, well, yes, we'll make sure that that Victor's email address is available. Thanks again, Victor, for taking us through that today. I think it's been really useful. And thanks to everybody for logging on. Do come back to us in a couple of weeks' time for our next webinar. And yes, have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye all. Take care. Thanks for listening.